The basement was set up like a twisted medical facility. There were metal tables, surgical instruments, and restraints. On one table lay the body of Dr. Williams, pale and still. On another was Maria, and Sarah could see immediately that her friend was dead. "Oh God," Sarah sobbed. "Maria." "She lasted longer than the doctor," Victor said conversationally. "Nurses are tougher, I've found. More used to pain." Sarah tried to run then, but Victor was ready for her. He grabbed her arm and twisted it behind her back, forcing her toward an empty table. "Please," she begged. "I have a family. People who love me." "I know," Victor said. "2 brothers, from what I hear. Both in love with you. That's got to be complicated." Sarah went cold. "How do you know about that?" Victor smiled as he began strapping her to the table. "I've been watching you for weeks, Sarah. Following you home from work, learning your routines. I know about your shifts, your boyfriend Jake, his charming brother Danny. I even know about tonight's family dinner that went so wrong. You were there. I was outside. Saw you leave upset, saw both brothers chase after you in their cars. They're probably still looking for you right now." Victor finished with the restraints and walked over to a table of instruments. "The funny thing is, they'll never find you here. But they'll spend the rest of their lives wondering what happened, blaming themselves, maybe even blaming each other." Sarah struggled against the straps, but they were too tight. "What do you want from me?" Victor picked up a scalpel and examined its edge. "I'm a collector, Sarah. I collect experiences. The experience of fear, of pain, of the exact moment when hope dies in someone's eyes. You're going to give me all of that." But as Victor moved toward her with the scalpel, they both heard something that made him freeze. Car doors slamming outside. Multiple voices shouting her name. "Sarah! Sarah, are you in there?" It was Jake's voice, and then Danny's, calling out in the rain. Victor's face twisted with rage. "How did they find us?" Sarah didn't know, but hope bloomed in her chest for the first time since getting in the car with Victor. "Sarah!" The voices were getting closer. Victor grabbed a gun from a drawer and headed toward the stairs. "Looks like your boyfriend's just volunteered to join my collection," he said. And Sarah realized that trying to save her, Jake and Danny had just walked into the same trap that had already claimed 3 lives. Jake and Danny had spent 2 hours driving through Portland, checking every coffee shop, park, and quiet spot where Sarah might have gone to think. They'd called her friends, driven past her apartment 3 times, and even checked the hospital parking lot in case she'd gone to work early. It was Danny who suggested they work together instead of separately. "This is stupid," he'd said when they met at a gas station on Burnside. "We're covering the same ground twice. She could be anywhere." Jake wanted to tell his brother to go home, that this was his mess to clean up. But the truth was, Danny knew Sarah's habits better than Jake wanted to admit. Danny knew she liked to drive when she was upset, knew she sometimes went to the 24-hour diner on Sandy Boulevard when she couldn't sleep. They'd tried the diner first. No Sarah, but the waitress remembered her. "Pretty girl, dark hair?" "Yeah, she was here about an hour ago. Ordered coffee but didn't drink it. Just sat in that corner booth staring at her phone. Left without saying anything." "Did you see which direction she went?" Jake asked. "North, I think. Toward the industrial district." That's how they ended up in the maze of warehouses and empty lots, driving slowly with their windows down, calling Sarah's name into the rain. "There," Danny said suddenly, pointing. "That's her car." Sarah's silver Corolla was parked behind a rundown warehouse, next to 2 other vehicles that looked abandoned. Jake pulled his Honda next to Danny's BMW, and both brothers got out. The warehouse looked deserted, but there were lights on somewhere inside. "Sarah!" Jake called out. "Are you here?" They circled the building, finding several doors. Most were locked, but a side entrance was slightly ajar. "This doesn't feel right," Danny said quietly. "Why would she come here?" Jake was thinking the same thing, but he pushed the door open anyway. "Sarah? It's Jake and Danny. Are you okay?" The main floor of the warehouse was empty except for shadows and the sound of rain on the metal roof. But then they heard something that made both brothers freeze. A muffled scream from somewhere below them. "That was her," Danny said, and for the first time since the dinner disaster, the brothers were completely united in purpose. They found the basement stairs and crept down, using their phone flashlights to see. The smell hit them halfway down. Blood and death and something worse. "Jesus," Jake whispered. At the bottom of the stairs, they saw light coming from under a door. Danny reached for the handle, but Jake grabbed his arm. "We need to call the police," Jake whispered. "There's no time," Danny replied. "You heard her scream." Danny pushed open the door, and both brothers stepped into a nightmare. The basement was lit by harsh fluorescent lights that revealed metal tables, surgical instruments, and restraints. On two of the tables were bodies, a man and a woman, both obviously dead. On a third table, Sarah was strapped down, very much alive but terrified. "Jake! Danny!" she cried when she saw them. "It's a trap. He's right behind you," Victor Reeves said, stepping out from behind a support beam. He was holding a gun, and his smile was the coldest thing either brother had ever seen. "How touching," Victor continued. "The love triangle comes full circle. Two brothers willing to die for the same woman." "Let her go," Jake said, stepping forward. "You want hostages, take us instead." "Oh, I'm keeping all of you," Victor replied. "This is even better than I planned." A family tragedy, brothers turn on each other over a woman. Murder-suicide, very believable. Danny was scanning the room, looking for anything they could use as a weapon. "Who are you? What do you want with Sarah?" "I'm a collector," Victor said. "And Sarah was supposed to be my latest acquisition. But you two showing up opens up so many more possibilities." Victor gestured with the gun toward the empty tables. "Here's what's going to happen. One of you is going to kill the other, and then I'm going to kill the survivor. Sarah gets to watch it all before her turn comes." "You're insane," Jake said. "Maybe. But I'm also holding the gun." Victor reached into a drawer and pulled out a knife, tossing it toward the brothers. It clattered on the concrete floor between them. "Pick it up." Neither Jake nor Danny moved. "Pick it up," Victor repeated, "or I start cutting pieces off Sarah until one of you does." Sarah was crying now, struggling against the restraints. "Don't," she said. "Please don't do this because of me." Danny bent down and picked up the knife, but instead of turning toward Jake, he looked at Sarah. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For everything. For tonight, for making things complicated, for not being a better brother to Jake." "Danny, don't," Jake said, understanding what his brother was planning. But Danny was already moving. He spun toward Victor, throwing the knife while launching himself forward. Victor fired the gun twice. The first bullet caught Danny in the shoulder, spinning him around but not stopping him. The second bullet caught him in the chest, and he went down hard. "Danny!" Both Jake and Sarah screamed his name. Jake dove for his brother, pressing his hands against the chest wound. Blood was everywhere, more blood than Jake had ever seen. "Stupid boy," Victor said, walking over with the gun still trained on them. Now I have to improvise. But as Victor got closer, Danny's eyes opened. With his good arm, he grabbed Victor's ankle and yanked hard. Victor stumbled, and the gun went flying across the room. Jake didn't hesitate. He launched himself at Victor, and they went down together, rolling across the blood-slicked floor. Victor was older but desperate, fighting with the strength of a man who had nothing left to lose. They crashed into a table of instruments, sending scalpels and bone saws scattering. Victor grabbed a surgical knife and slashed at Jake's face, opening a cut from his temple to his jaw. Jake rolled away and came up with a bone saw in his hands. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. "You killed those people," Jake said, circling Victor. "Dr. Williams. Maria. How many others?" "Enough to know exactly how you're going to die," Victor replied, lunging with the surgical knife. Jake swung the bone saw, catching Victor across the wrist. Victor dropped the knife but immediately grabbed another instrument, a long metal probe that he wielded like a sword. They fought among the tables and restraints, slipping in blood, crashing into walls. Victor was skilled with his makeshift weapons, but Jake was younger and fueled by rage and desperation. The end came when Victor overextended himself trying to stab Jake in the heart. Jake dodged sideways and brought the bone saw down on Victor's neck. Victor Reeves collapsed, his blood mixing with that of his victims. Jake dropped the saw and ran to Danny, who was barely conscious but still breathing. "Stay with me," Jake said, pressing harder on the chest wound. "Sarah, are you hurt?" "No," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Just get me out of these restraints." Jake freed Sarah with shaking hands, and she immediately went to work on Danny, using her nursing skills to assess his injuries. "The shoulder wound isn't too bad," she said, "but the chest, we need to get him to a hospital now." Jake called 911 while Sarah worked to stop Danny's bleeding. As they waited for the ambulance, Danny grabbed Jake's hand with his good arm. "I'm sorry," Danny whispered. "About everything. About Sarah, about tonight." "Shut up," Jake said, tears in his eyes. "You're going to be fine. We're going to figure everything out." Danny managed a weak smile. "She loves you, you know. Really loves you. I could see it in her eyes when she thought Victor was going to kill you." Jake looked at Sarah, who was still working on Danny's wounds but listening to every word. "I love both of you," she said quietly. "In different ways, but I love you both." The sirens were getting closer now, and Jake could hear voices upstairs, police officers calling down to them. "Down here." Jake shouted, "We need paramedics." As the first responders flooded the basement, Jake held his brother's hand and looked around at the carnage. 3 bodies on metal tables, a 4th on the floor. Blood everywhere. The stuff of nightmares. But they were alive. All 3 of them were alive. And maybe, if they were very lucky, that would be enough to build something good from all this darkness. 6 months later, Jake Morrison sat in the witness chair of Multnomah County Courthouse, facing a jury and a packed courtroom. The trial of the century, the media had called it, though Victor Reeves would never stand trial for his crimes. The proceedings were to officially close the case and provide closure for the families of his victims. Jake's scar had healed to a thin white line that ran from his temple to his jaw. Sarah said it made him look distinguished, but Jake still avoided mirrors when he could. "Mr. Morrison," the prosecutor said, "can you tell the court what happened in the basement of that warehouse on November 15th? Jake had told this story dozens of times, to police, to FBI agents, to therapists, to his mother who still woke up screaming some nights. But each time felt like the first time, each detail as sharp and terrible as when it was happening. "My brother Danny and I went looking for Sarah Martinez," Jake began. We found her car behind the warehouse and heard her scream from inside the building. As Jake testified, he could see Sarah in the gallery, sitting next to his mother. Sarah had testified the day before, her voice steady as she described Victor's collection of victims and his plans for more. The police had eventually connected Victor to 7 murders across 3 states, all medical professionals who had tried to help him when he faked emergencies. Danny wasn't in the courtroom. He was still recovering at home, doing physical therapy to regain full use of his left arm. The bullet had missed his heart by inches, but the damage to muscle and bone would take months more to heal completely. He'd insisted Jake testify alone, saying he wasn't ready to face a courtroom full of strangers asking about the worst night of his life. Jake continued his testimony, describing how they'd found Sarah chained in Victor's makeshift operating room, surrounded by the bodies of his previous victims. How Victor had emerged from the shadows like something out of a nightmare, wielding a scalpel with surgical precision. How Danny had thrown himself between Victor and Sarah, taking a bullet meant for her. "And then what happened, Mr. Morrison?" the prosecutor prompted. "Victor was going to kill my brother," Jake said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "He was standing over Danny with that scalpel, and I knew if I didn't act, we were all going to die in that basement." Jake described the final moments, how he'd grabbed the fallen gun, how Victor had turned toward him with those cold, calculating eyes, how the single shot had echoed through the warehouse like thunder. Victor Reeves had died instantly, his reign of terror ending in a basement that smelled of death and fear. The defense attorney, appointed to represent Victor's estate in the civil proceedings, had few questions. The evidence was overwhelming, the case clear-cut. Victor Reeves had been a monster, and Jake Morrison had been forced to kill him to save lives. After Jake stepped down from the witness stand, he walked outside into the crisp October air. The media circus that had surrounded the case for months was finally winding down, though photographers still snapped pictures as he descended the courthouse steps. Sarah was waiting for him by his truck, her dark hair catching the afternoon sunlight. She'd been offered a transfer to a hospital in Seattle, a chance to start fresh somewhere that didn't carry the weight of what had happened. But she'd turned it down, saying Portland was her home now, scars and all. "How do you feel?" she asked as they drove away from the courthouse. "Like it's finally over," Jake said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. The nightmares still came sometimes, for all of them. Danny jumped at unexpected sounds. Sarah still checked her locks twice before bed. Jake carried the weight of taking a life, even though everyone assured him he'd had no choice. But they were healing, slowly but surely. Danny had started seeing someone, a nurse from the rehabilitation center who understood trauma and didn't ask too many questions about his scars. Jake had returned to his construction job, finding comfort in building things instead of just tearing them down. And Sarah continued saving lives at the hospital, though she'd switched to pediatrics, saying she needed to focus on beginnings rather than endings. 3 months after the trial, Jake proposed to Sarah on the same hiking trail where they'd had their first real conversation about their future. The ring was simple, a single diamond that caught the light like hope. She said yes without hesitation, and when they told Danny, he cried, the first tears Jake had seen from his brother since the warehouse. They were married the following spring in a small ceremony at their mother's house. Danny served as best man, his left arm still slightly stiff but functional. He gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry, talking about how love could survive anything, even the worst nightmares, if people were brave enough to fight for it. The warehouse where Victor had kept his victims was torn down 6 months after the trial. The city built a small memorial park in its place, with a plaque honoring the 7 people who had died there. Jake visited once, with Sarah and Danny, and they left flowers for the victims whose names they now knew. Dr. Patricia Chun, 34, emergency room physician nurse Michael Torres, 28, trauma specialist Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, 41, cardiac surgeon paramedic James Wilson, 35, father of 2 Dr. Sarah Kim, 29, pediatric resident nurse David Thompson, 45, 20-year veteran Dr. Lisa Park, 38, emergency medicine attending. They were just trying to help people, Sarah said as they stood before the memorial. Just like we all do every day. And they saved us, in the end, Danny added quietly. If Victor hadn't been so obsessed with collecting medical professionals, he never would have targeted Sarah. We never would have found him. He'd still be out there. Jake nodded, understanding what his brother meant. The victim's sacrifice had meaning beyond their individual tragedies. Their deaths had exposed a killer who might have claimed dozens more lives if he'd remained hidden. As they walked away from the memorial, Jake felt something shift inside him, not quite peace, but acceptance. The nightmares would always be part of him, the weight of that night permanently etched into his memory. But he'd learned that trauma didn't have to define a person's future. Love could be stronger than fear, if you let it. 2 years later, Sarah gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Hope Patricia Morrison, hope for their future. Patricia for the first victim whose medical expertise had unknowingly helped them survive Victor's trap. Danny was the first person besides Jake to hold her, his scarred hands steady and sure as he cradled his niece. The Morrison brothers had lost their innocence in that warehouse basement, had learned that the world contained more darkness than they'd ever imagined. But they'd also discovered that when faced with ultimate evil, ordinary people could find extraordinary courage. They'd learned that family wasn't just about blood, but about who you'd die for and who you'd live for. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, you got to do both. Thank you for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you and see you in the next one.